Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and we're so glad that you're here. Our regular webinar attendees know that we welcome you with a song as you log in, and today you heard the Bee Gees singing Massachusetts because our two fabulous speakers hail from, you guessed it, Massachusetts. Before we hear their story, for those of you who are new, you might not yet know that Stories Change Power equips people to be effective, empathetic, and trusted advocates. We do that through workshops that we customize for your group or organization, through coaching and keynotes, through our learning communities, and through short courses. Next Wednesday, we will kick off an ethical storytelling course. If you have no idea what I mean when I say ethical storytelling, I recommend registering. If you have an idea but aren't really certain that you're being ethical at every single step in your storytelling, again, I recommend registering. We'll share that link in the chat to learn more and join this course. And we'll also share a link to make sure that you're staying looped in with us on LinkedIn. As all of those links magically appear, I want to thank Rebecca Messer for all of her support before, during, and after these webinars. Thank you, Rebecca. 4 quick reminders before we talk today about citizen power: captions, chat, Q&A, and camera. We have the captions enabled, so please use those if they're helpful to you. We have the chat open for conversation among humans. Your AI is welcome to watch the recording, but we will not include that in the chat, and they will not be on the webinar today. Number 3, as you've got questions, please put those in the Q&A box. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. That's helpful for us just to make sure your questions don't get lost in the chat. We may mention your first name, but we will not identify you by your full name, and you can always opt to be anonymous as well in your questions if you prefer. And if we can't reach your question today, and we might not, we've got a lot to cover in this amazing story, we will answer it either directly or in an upcoming newsletter or on LinkedIn. And then lastly, as a webinar, you are off camera, your mic is off, so make yourself comfortable as we dive in. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Jesse Cummings and Rebecca Townsend today. Jesse is the owner of Titan Fence. He has lived in Longmeadow, Massachusetts for around 4 years. Before establishing his own company, he had a long history in corporate America, working his way up to leadership positions at T-Mobile. Welcome, Jesse. Rebecca M. Townsend has served the town of Longmeadow in many different capacities, more than I can list today. Her first role, though, was as an elected charter commission member, where she collaborated with commission members to research forms of government and prepared a new constitution for the town. Dr. Townsend has been a communications professor for over 25 years. She was honored by the White House as a champion of change for public engagement work and is in academic leadership at Holyoke Community College. Welcome, Jesse. Welcome, Rebecca. It's really great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
As always, we want to know more about who is joining us today, so we can make this as helpful as possible to you. There will be a poll that pops up in just a moment with 2 questions. First, we'd like to know, how long have you worked in advocacy? And you've got a number of options there, ranging from you're brand new through to experts, or maybe you've not worked in advocacy at all. And I'm realizing we might actually not, that we might have had a hiccup with the poll. So let's do this. We're going to do this differently today, which means get all 10 fingers ready or thumbs ready if you're joining by phone, and put these in the chat. If you have worked in advocacy, give us an idea how many years you've been in doing that work. That might be that it's been a few months. It may be that you've been doing it 20 years. And as always on our webinars, everybody is welcome, no matter what field you're in, or maybe not in any field at all if you're volunteering or retiring. So let us know in the chat how long you've worked in advocacy. And then our second question is, do you know your local town or city officials and their roles? And here we'll give you 3 options. 1, yes, I know who all of my local officials are and I know their roles. 2, somewhat, I could name a few, but maybe I don't know all of them or what everyone does. And 3rd, nope, I don't know any local officials and I don't know what they do. So feel free to do some iteration of that if you want to do 1, 2, and 3. Yes, I know them all. 2, I know them somewhat. 3, I don't know them at all, or your own answer. I see some answers coming in, so feel free to keep Okay, we see some decades in advocacy, good deal, community and education. And someone, yes, who knows all of their officials, knows most, good deal. We'll keep seeing those, keep putting those in as we go, because that's a really helpful thing for us to know, because I think many folks would be in that third category, not knowing who local officials are or what they do. Some folks who have 3 years in advocacy, good deal, welcome. With that, as those answers come in, I want to turn over Rebecca and Jesse. You have such an amazing story to share. And Jesse, if you could kick us off before we get into the how of what happened, I want folks to understand the what. And we were a little mysterious in our webinar description where we said that you, as a concerned citizen, saw negative impacts of a policy in your community. Can you tell us what was the policy and how did it affect you?
Yeah. So, essentially the policy was the town of Longmeadow does not allow any type of commercial vehicle to be parked in a driveway overnight. It could be big trucks, little cars. It doesn't matter. Like anything that has a commercial plate or was used there, in relationship to a business or a trade, could not be parked overnight in the town, whether it was on the road or whether it was in your driveway. It doesn't matter. There was a strict bylaw. And, that obviously negatively impacted me because as a business owner, I leverage my business I need a vehicle for it. Right. So I was kind of in direct violation of that, right? Where I had to park my vehicle in my own driveway and I started to get violation letters and fines and things like that around this, the bylaw. So that is kind of what the problem was. And that was kind of like the impact that it had on me. So kind of like in a little bit of a nutshell there.
I appreciate that. And you went to, I think safe to say, pretty great lengths to try to comply with this.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, can you?
I did short of, everything. I mean, I offered, to remove lettering altogether, which was very minimal to begin with. I offered to, purchase one of these like large, like carport type things, which are like about $1,000 and park it under there. I had offered to, I obviously own a fence company. So I was like, I'll bring my fence out. That wasn't a solution because I was in violation of another bylaw. And then I had gone to such an extreme to get quotes from a lot of the general contractors that I know to essentially build a $45,000 addition garage off my house to put the vehicle in that, and that wasn't going to work either. So it was basically just like creating every type of solution possible, and I kept running into different roadblocks around other issues, right? Whether the garage, it wasn't meeting like the building code because it was too close to my neighbor's garage, so that wasn't an option. And then it just kept dominoing of like trying to find solutions and immediately being met with another obstacle over and over and over again.
Amazing. And I think at one point you were even considering like just looking at the possibility of moving to a different house.
Yeah, I mean, it basically, so I'm not necessarily originally from Longmeadow. So, I was like, okay, I mean, maybe we have to move. I mean, if it doesn't, if none of these solutions are working, we might have to move. And we got into a position where, obviously we went down the road of the citizens petition. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it got to the point where we had gotten approaching the town meeting, and I reached out to a couple of realtors that I work with directly, and I was like, hey, listen, like if this doesn't go my way, I'm going to have to move. Like, I'm not going to purchase another. The solution was really to either purchase another car to then drive to my vehicle that I would have to park somewhere else, or purchase my vehicle individually and have it under a passenger plate, which is just ridiculous, right? So I had talked to this realtor and I was like, hey, listen, like, if this doesn't go my way, I'm not spending $20,000 on a regular car to just go drive a mile down the road. How much, could you sell my house? Like, if I had to move. And he was like, yeah, of course. I mean, in this market, especially in a town like Longmeadow, which is so desired, you can sell your house in a couple of days. He's like, but you're going to go into an absolute gauntlet of what the current housing market is like, so you're going to lose out. So, I mean, it was just but if that's what had to happen, that's what had to happen. So, this challenge would have leaked tremendously into now my personal life, where we came here for the schools and all these different types of things. So it would have had a huge kink in our plans, I guess.
Yeah, major ripple effect. And Rebecca, I want to hear next how this came to you, but one first quick clarification, because Jesse, you touched on something that is a principle in communications. If I say the word tree, for example, if you live in Miami, people will picture a palm tree. If you live in Colorado, you'll picture something very different. And so when you say commercial vehicle, I want to be sure that we're all on the same page. Can you explain what your commercial vehicle was to everybody?
Yeah, so I drive every day Ford F-250. So, just a little bit bigger than your standard F-150s that you'll see on the roads everyone's, all the time. It was nothing with like a dump truck or a flat body. It was just a regular F-250, four doors, just like normal, and a 6.5 foot pickup bed. That's it. So it was nothing that, most people see every single day on the road, driving in and out of their towns and their driveways. It wasn't anything with these backup alarms and these dump trucks and all these different things. And none of that. It was just your regular, some of you might even have one, right? Just as a personal vehicle, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I grew up in Texas, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and I hope
There you
other
go.
folks picture like
Yeah,
this is not the truck that's pulling in with the major construction. This is something you might see at the grocery store parking lot. So
correct. Right.
awesome. Okay, and Rebecca, now how did all of this come to you?
Well, the town manager's office had called me and they said that there was a citizen looking to create a citizen's petition and would I help? And I was very glad for that because I do regularly make myself available to any citizen who would like to make a change in their community. I can provide a lot of input on what the process is, how it works, what are the different time points. I don't advise on strategy. I'm not an advocate for any given position, but I can provide assistance to advocates to understand how to work the process. How does it work? And so the town manager's office gave me a call, said, please get in touch with Jesse Cummings. I'm happy to do so. And we started off our conversations.
And Jesse, from your perspective, how did you find Rebecca? Like, would you have known to go to all the channels that you eventually found?
No, no. So, I think one of the, like, I think one of the best parts about this whole exhausting process was the willingness to help from everyone. So when it got to the point where the citizens petition finally came up, because after all these options, I looked at the building commission. I was like, "What do you want me to do? Like what do you want me to do?" And he's just like, "Well, you can change the bylaw." And I think he was joking almost when he was saying it. He was kind of like, "Yeah, you can change the law." And I looked at him and I was like, like I'm having a tough time parking like my personal vehicle in my driveway. You think anybody's going to be on board with changing a law in a town that doesn't want me to be here in the first place almost? And that's when he kind of talked about the petition and everything. But the willingness to help, starts with him to be like, hey, maybe it was jokingly or not, but it was an avenue. And then, that leads me to, the town manager. And then the town manager is like, yeah, like, look, like, we get it. Like this thing stinks. Like, we don't, it's annoying for us to deal with, you should reach out to this person. And then that kind of got me to Rebecca. So, had I had not really had any had that guidance or that path, there was no way I would find Rebecca to begin with. There's no way I would have even found the petition to begin with, really. And then, along the way, people were in the local governments, truthfully, like, people were really understanding of what this problem was, and then they just kind of kept like giving me different people. And then eventually I started to land at the right people, right? Which was Rebecca and some of the select board members. And the planning board members, which was really kind of like, then everything started to kind of come together a little bit. Or at least I had the pieces, the building blocks to kind of get that going. But there's no way I would have found it on my own. No, not a chance.
I want to dig into something you said there. It might have almost felt like a throwaway, but the feeling that you got that the town like didn't even want you there, or want the truck. Yeah, can you share a little bit
Yeah.
more about that?
I mean, I think that that's obviously that's going to differ from person to person, but I think that when you look at the bylaw as it really was written, which was enacted in like 1987, and growing up in Western Massachusetts, I grew up not too far from here, maybe like 20 minutes from here. This town was kind of known as, a little uppity and a little, lawyers and doctors kind of was what this town was. So this bylaw was kind of written to kind of weed out those types of people, right? Not necessarily like saying we don't want you here, but kind of also saying we don't want you here, right? Because they know that you drive these trucks, they know that you have these vehicles, and maybe you advertise on them or not, but it was kind of like a subtle, like, all right, like how can we make this work for us without saying we don't want you here? And that wasn't just me. I mean, a lot of the contractors that I worked with on this had the same feeling. They were just like, well, I mean, how am I supposed to live here? I mean, and a lot of these contractors that I worked with on this particular bylaw grew up here. They went to school here. They stayed here. So that was a huge advantage for me to kind of like draft this thing, was because there was a lot of like, hometown like history there, right? So, but yeah, like that's basically, how it was written, was definitely trying to like push away these types of working class people. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And that it's really powerful because it's not just something where it's just an old law that happened to be on the books. There's that extra layer of this feels like it's really meant to, it's not for, unwelcoming to somebody like me. And so all the more daunting, I imagine, to come in and say, and now I'm going to be the one to try to change it.
And it was so like the way it was written back in, the 80s, it was so it was so well written where there was no deviating from it. Like there was no loophole, right? Unless the people that are in the town, whether that were enforcing it, whether it be the police or code enforcement or building inspector, like unless they wanted to kind of like blur it a little bit and have a gray area, there was no deviating from it. Like it was black and white. It was like that you can't do this. There's no other option for you.
Mhm.
So that's what made it so personal, like kind of like a personal attack, was because there is no like, oh well, you got to park, there was like you could park it in a garage, but I don't have it like, there's a lot of houses in Longmeadow that don't have garages, they're kind of tight together. So it's kind of like, well, if you don't have a garage, you're kind of out of luck. And a lot of these vehicles like mine maybe won't fit in like a standard garage, just height wise.
Mhm.
So it absolutely was like a target. It definitely was a target, but it was so written so specifically where there's no deviating from it. There's no finding a solution.
Yeah. I mean, as evidenced by the fact you nearly sold your house or thought
Yeah,
about
yeah,
it.
basically. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear both your perspectives. And Rebecca, if we can start with you, walk us through the process and just give some folks a sense, like this was not a 1 week undertaking. Like where did it start and how long did it last and how did it go?
Sure. Well, for folks who live in communities with city councils, for example, if they want to get some change to happen, they have to persuade a city council member to take up their cause and champion it. And it's many months, many years process, possibly. They can't do anything themselves directly, necessarily. In a town in Massachusetts, where about 260 towns have a direct democracy where citizens can do things themselves. There's no other legislature other than them. So Jesse, by moving here and being a voter, me by moving here and being a voter, we are part of the legislature. And so it begins with a citizen getting a petition together, and a petition for an annual town meeting, which occurs second Tuesday in May, requires 10 signatures. So he got more than 10 signatures to put an article on the warrant, the agenda for the meeting. Now, there's different ways to write that article, and I don't know whether you'd like me to go into that detail, but he could do it very, very specifically and write the law that he wanted to see in there, or he could write a more general kind of placeholder subject matter,
Mhm.
and at least the subject would be given as a heads up to the rest of the community. And given the time frame, the short time frame that he had in a window to get the petition in, he went with that other general bylaw approach. Then the meeting happens, but in that in-between space of him filing the petition and the meeting happening, I shared with him that if he wanted to, he could connect with people, boards, committees, citizens who have trucks, who don't have trucks, a wide variety of people, to see what kind of concerns they had, what kinds of hopes that they had for any kind of a change, because the town had tried this several years ago, but it had failed. It had tried changing it. And so this was a citizen doing it. He could connect with other citizens. And he did that. And he can tell you more about how he did that, but that process allowed him to create a motion at the meeting that was tailored to the concerns that everyone had. And then the meeting happened, and I don't know whether you want me to give this away, but
Let's save that part for a
let's
second.
save the end.
Yeah, and so when you say short window, was this, end of 1 year you were first in touch, and then you're planning for this May meeting early in the year, like, or pretty short?
This was this spring. I mean, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was
Yeah.
all, I want to say, like January,
Yeah, it was basically
February.
it was definitely, it had started when my season wasn't in full like full flux. So it was, it's like January was when, things started to kind of like get going. And then, the meeting wasn't until May. But, when, as Rebecca stated, like based on the timeline and when that citizens petition had to be filed, it was like weeks that I had to get the verbiage, like whether the verbiage or how I wanted to do it, and then the signatures. So it was kind of a fire drill almost. But after that, there was, this was like a 4-month probably lead up to that meeting at that point. But yeah.
Got it. Okay. And so then Rebecca had advised you, Jesse, to maybe go out and talk to folks and understand different positions. What did you do with that advice?
So based on, long story, like, short answer is like, I took it, right. But, the reason why I took it was because I knew that I was diving into a territory that I don't really have a lot of experience on. I have a lot of experience in corporate America of getting people to do what you want, not do what you want them to do, but get their buy-in to do what you want them to do, right? And so I realized that that's sort of the path that I'm going to have to take. I'm not going to be able to just bully it through and kind of get going. So I realized that I kind of had to take go a little slower to really get to where I wanted to go. And so I did take it, right? And it took a little bit of time to try to find not the right people, but just some people that would have, opinions that wouldn't be similar to mine. And, it initially kind of got going where I was like, okay, let me reach out to people that I know are not going to agree with me, right? Like, a lot of the older crowd, like people that have been around the town a long time, so I started to reach out to those people. And started, some of them didn't even want to hear anything I had to say. So I was like, all right, great. Well, that's terrific. But then a lot of them were kind of just like, okay, yeah, all right, like, let's talk about it. And, in conjunction with those people, I reached out to, a bunch of customers of mine that because we do a lot of work in this town too. So, it was very easy to get like 40 contacts just from that, to be like, hey, this is what we're going through. Can I get your feedback on that? And even though they were prior customers of mine, a lot of them they weren't on board with it, but a lot of that majority, I was able to at least have a conversation with, right. And through those conversations, right, through this avenue, I was able to get an exorbitant amount of workable feedback, not just like feedback of like, I don't like this. Like, there was legitimate concerns as to why they don't want it. And I was able to take that information and be like, okay, like, now that I have these tangible things that I can go and use, let me then partner with the people that I'm working with, a lot of the contractors that I know and that I work with every day. Let me talk to these people and see where this fits with what we all need, right? Because me personally, I just need to park my truck. And my truck is very low key. It's not anything crazy. It's not anything specific, right? The lettering is very low key. So I can just make a quick little adjustment here and I'm fine. But there's a lot of people that are in town that I work with, at least 10 of them that I worked with on this, they have different vehicles than me, right? They have vans, they have cars, they have caps on their trucks as an electrician or something. So, I wanted to go to them and be like, listen, this is what I'm hearing. This is what the pushbacks. So these are the hot buttons. Let's call them that, right? These are the hot buttons. Will these work for you, right? Are these going to work for you? And a lot of them were like, yeah, like, I think we can work with this. And then some of them, which have a little bit more egregious type of vehicle, it wouldn't work for them. And that conversation from me to them was kind of like, listen, like, we're going to have to make some sacrifices here. Like, every single one of us this is not going to work for every single one of us, but this is a tremendous way to get at the very least to make a tremendous step forward. And, we might have to lose a couple things to win something bigger, and then at that point, we were able to kind of like, okay, this works. Let's put this verbiage in there. That will alleviate this concern. So based on the feedback from Rebecca to talk to these people, that's kind of where we ended up getting to the end of this bylaw, where it actually had something tangible that was effective, that was pretty much at that point had weeded out almost every concern, and the concerns were very fair and understanding. But yeah, that feedback was taken, and it was ultimately how we ended up getting to such a collaborative end result, that was effective. Clear.
Yeah, and I'd love to get into the weeds a little bit on that, because I think it's easy to say, I went and talked to folks who disagreed with me, but can you talk us through, like, what does that look like? Is that, just running into people in the grocery store? Is that seeking out, like, folks who will disagree? Like, how do you find those folks and get into those conversations?
Yeah. So, a handful of them, like I said, were customers of mine that I had immediate contact with already. Like, I already knew who they were. I could contact them immediately. A lot of the ones that I found that, I knew would disagree, I just used the resource of the community forum that we have in town. And I just went on there and I just found people that would go on posts like consistently. And I mean, consistently, like, that thing gets some action. And I found those ones that were very, very vocal, and vocal around no changes. Like, people would go in there and post something that they're frustrated about the town, whether it's the trash barrels or, construction or something. And people, these specific ones would go in there and they'd be like, well, this is the town that we live in, blah, 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 bedroom community. I'm like, that's who I want to talk to. So I would reach out through Facebook to those people and be like, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. Can we have a conversation? So I found a lot of people through that avenue. I also found people just, out and about, right? Like, they'd see my truck, they would be like, oh, where are you out of? And I would have that conversation with them. So it was just a lot of, like, some targeting of specifically looking for people that won't agree with me based on just me assuming they won't agree with me. And I was kind of right. They didn't agree with me. But then it was also like customers of mine that I knew I would be able to, like, literally talk to, like, I knew I'd be able to talk to them. And also leveraging the contractors that I was working with, getting them to talk to previous people that they know and committees that they know, or people that are on committees that they know. And also leveraging the select board. I got a ton of feedback from the select board members and the planning board members, and all of these, like, that's kind of where I found these people. The committees were a little tougher to, like, kind of like figure out, because, like, there's a lot of them. So it's, it was hard to kind of figure out which ones to kind of go with. So I was like, all right, like, let me more target people, like Rebecca said, that I think might not agree with me. Let me get to people that I know I can get in contact with, opposed to, because I didn't have that much time. I mean, it was, there was like 3-4 months, but that goes really fast, especially when my season starts in February. and I get so busy. I mean, like, you know what I mean? I get so busy where I don't have time to be on the phone, talking to somebody,
Got a
let
full-time
alone,
job, a full
let
life already.
alone
Like this
talking
is
to
more.
somebody who disagrees with me. Like, I don't have time to do that. So, and I have, obviously I have a son and I have a wife, I have a family. So it's like, it's trying to fit this stuff into my already busy life. I had to try to find just people that I would be able to get in contact with immediately. And it ended up being around 100 people or so.
Wow.
That I was able to really have like structured conversations with. It was timely, but it deemed effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Rebecca, I'd love to hear your perspective. I think it was a community board, if I've got the name right. I mean, what do you see there and folks engaging or not engaging, or kind of give us a sense of how people are active or not in the community?
Town meeting as a legislature has been operating in the town of Longmeadow in various capacities since the town was settled in 1644, incorporated in 1783, the first town in Massachusetts to be incorporated after the Revolution. It was a more exclusive uh, body back then. Women got the right to vote. It became a lot more open. It has changed over the years and adapted. We now use electronic voting, and we have a wide variety of folks who participate, and some who participate just on one issue and then leave.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they come back, maybe they don't, but it's an event. And so if you have a deep interest in a hot button issue, the room is going to be packed. The largest meeting in my memory is about 2,500 people, something like that. And so attendance is based on how hot an issue is and
Mm-hmm.
whether advocates bring their supporters out. If it's a kind of a sleepy issue, something that, the regulars, the regular attendees will address, and folks know that, attendance tends to be lower.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I was telling Jesse is there's no way to guarantee how people feel about your issue. And that if you are an advocate, it's a advocate's job to rally their people. And without knowing how many people would be in attendance, it's not anything that is known for certain. So in this particular meeting, we had around 400 participants, around thereabouts. And so
How does that compare to, like, is that a larger number than usual, around
it's
usual?
about a regular number. I mean, we've had contentious issues. My most contentious meeting was about gun regulations, and there were over 1,200 people present. So it depends on, and that's borne out by research throughout Vermont, and there's some research in Massachusetts that's emerging now that shows that if it's a controversial issue, people will show up.
Makes sense. Yep. So the process then, so Jesse, you've just to keep folks, along this process with us, we've got you recognizing there's an issue, that this policy is really not forgiving. You're wanting to change it. You have a lot of conversations. There's a petition to get it on the May agenda. And then tell us about the town meeting when you get there, like just walk us through what that was like.
Yeah. So, okay. So, at this point we have, chatted with everybody. We have all the feedback. And, just to kind of like lead up to that really quickly, like, in addition to like Rebecca being just incredible throughout the process, right? A couple specific select board members were above and beyond like effective and helpful, in addition to some planning board members too, like that helped it get to this point also, so at the time when we get to the town meeting, at this point I have kind of like, I have the verbiage, but it's like, it's my verbiage, right? Like, it's not like legal, right? The town charters have a lot of specific words in them, and like wingdings and all these characters and everything. So I had connected with one of the select board members leading up to this whole point. One of them in particular was Vineeth Hamavathy. So he's one of the select board members in town. Phenomenal, right? Like he, in addition to Rebecca, him and a couple others, like they kind of restored my belief in like local government. So he was just immensely helpful, again, with helping me get to the right people, and helping me get the word out and ideas and thought processes. But then from a legal perspective, he then had me connect with another select board member named Josh Levine. And within like 2 hours, Josh was like, send me what you have. And I was like, okay. So I sent him everything that we had wrote down and we had collected and exactly what I wanted it to be. And within 2 hours, he has the entire bylaw written, like boom. And I'm like, okay, like great, this is great. Those conversations might have been a little rocky up until that point, but they got there, so great.
I want to jump in for just a second, because that sounds like a big contrast, like especially for somebody coming from corporate America and ready, accustomed to things moving really quickly. I think there were parts of the process where you're like, oh my gosh, this is like, I have this image of Zootopia with the sloths and just things moving really slowly. So was that a bit of a contrast?
Yeah, so coming from corporate, so when I worked at T-Mobile, right, I started at literally like a sales rep. I was like nothing, like just like a person helping with phones, and I had worked my way up from store manager, district manager, acting as a partial director in New England when my boss was gone. So I ran pretty much all of Boston, and I ran all of Western Massachusetts at one point too, and everything was fast. Like it was just like wireless. If anybody's in here has ever been involved in wireless or whatever, it is bullet. It is like boom, boom, boom. And solutions have to be found within hours. I mean hours, because people demand solutions. Like so that current culture, that environment is fast, right? So like, here's the problem, boom, here's the solution. And if you don't have the solution or you're not solution focused, you'll fail. It won't work. So then when that experience carried over into me being a business owner where everything is fast, right? Like customer comes to me and they're like, listen, man, like, I need this thing like now, I need this fence now, but the material, like, let's say the materials are back ordered, I'll find a solution, go to another one. And so I'm very fast, right? Like very, very speedy. And then as soon as I hit this local government, it was just like, boom, it was like glacial pace. And me being such a type A fast person, I'm freaking out. I'm like, everything's done through, a lot of it's done through emails, and this person's not responding, but then this person's got an idea. And I'm like, oh my God. So, this one's got an idea. So then everybody's got to review it and give their thoughts. And then they make an edit, but then this one's got an idea. And I'm like, oh my, I'm like, can I just get I'm like, if this was like me, I'm like, everybody's getting on a phone tonight, like right now. You know what I mean? Like that's how I used to be. And you can ask anybody who's ever worked for me, and they'll always tell you, for the most part, most of them will tell you Jesse was, the most aggressive, like dominating, like leader, but we got results and we were the best. Like we were always the best. It's just how it worked. Because if something was wrong, I was like, I need everybody on a phone right now. We're solving it right now. But that wasn't how this worked. And I was like, I have to slow down. I have to, these people aren't going to get on a phone and be like, screw this guy, who cares? This thing gets passed, doesn't bother me. I don't drive a commercial truck. So yeah, that was like, and my ventor was Rebecca. I'd call her back and be like, it's just driving me nuts. This one's not talking to this one, and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I get it. I understand. But just take it easy. This is, so, she was really a lot of calm in certain storms. And yeah, but that was the challenge, right? It's like, I'm very fast and I expect results fast. And it's just, this just wasn't that game. Like I had to slow down, and I had to take the time and allow these people to give that feedback, because if I was my normal self, they would shut down. They wouldn't help. They would shut down, and it just wouldn't be effective. So, that can answer the question. That's kind of what it was. Mm-hmm. And you can even, like I said, like Vineeth, like there was a couple times he's like, man, like you're really pushing on it. I'm like, yeah, man, and I know I'd irk a couple of these people too, just because of how I was, but they were tough, you know what I mean? So, but like I said, that, then kind of Vineeth specifically was like, you talk to Josh, and Josh, like, boom, like Josh was like, here you go. And I was like, that's what I'm talking about. Like that's what I'm talking about. And so, so now in my hand, I had everything, and then, and a specific planning board member too, Cheryl Thibodeau, I think is what her name is. She is the one, I think, like I don't know if it's called like the leader of the planning board or how it works.
Chair. Yep,
Yeah.
chair. Yep.
She was also phenomenal, right? Like, and if you ask her, I think she'd probably be like, oh man, that guy was a real pain, but he was a good guy. But she was great because, again, there's so much to the story. It brings me back to certain things, but in the middle of this whole process, Rebecca had called me one night and was like, hey, just want to let you know, like, when you go to the planning board meeting tonight, this was like in March. She's like, when you go to the planning board meeting tonight, just make sure you have everything with you. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, like the planning board meeting tonight, like 7, like, you got to go. Like, they're going to talk about your thing. They're going to recommend it or not recommend it. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, nobody reached out. I don't know about these things. Nobody reached out to me. So she was like, well, okay, well, there's a planning board meeting tonight at 7. You really need to be there. And I was in the middle of the feedback stage. Like, I had really nothing. So I had called my wife and I was like, I need you to get me like some sort of visual representation I can go to this meeting with and show them, what I want, what I don't want. And obviously, I went, it was unprepared, but there's no way to prepare with the amount of time that was allotted. But I think the way that I see it from it's all about perspective in my opinion. But if I had been prepared in that meeting, I would not have gotten the information from Cheryl and the rest of the planning board, of like how they worked on this in the past and why it failed. I would have been prepared and they would have been like, okay, yes or no. And it would have stopped. There would have been no room there. But because I was unprepared and they had voted at the time to not recommend it because it was nothing, like I don't hold that against them because there was nothing there. So, but they were like, well, listen, like, we get what you want to do. We're going to send you what we have. And Cheryl was like, listen, like, feel free to reach out to us. Like, we will help you. We will do this. And I was like, great. They probably did that because they felt bad because like, God, this guy has no idea what he's doing. But had I been prepared, that would have not happened. And I don't know if we would have gotten to the finish line because that obstacle that happened then led me with all this information, direct contact to Cheryl, direct feedback from them, and then, other planning board members. And that helped fuel what I was able to go to Josh with at the time. So every obstacle, which was like a very unpaved road, had finally got to Josh, was like, this is what I have. This is what I'm ready to go with. And, that he was able to kind of like legalize the verbiage and everything, and then that, in answer to when you asked me, then we are now at town meeting. We're at that day, that Tuesday, May 13th. And
Hold on just 1 second, because I think you're about to, before we get into that, I just want to pause for a second. I think what you said is really profound. This notion of like the path that you were going felt so unpaved. I mean, this is the first time you've not tried to change a law before. And so seeing that this focus on, on this particular law, it seems like things are moving at a glacial pace. And Rebecca, I'd love to hear from your perspective, kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit. What are all the different factors, as things feel like on one issue, they're moving slowly. What's the kind of the rest of the story, if I can quote Paul Harvey?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is a citizen doing something on his own, and he's making a conscious effort to reach out to those who disagree and craft something that is responsive to community needs and wants. And because we're not a business, we're a democracy, there's give and take. And, it's what works in a business world of you're doing this does not work in a democracy. We don't have an authoritarian in charge. We don't have somebody saying, this is what it's going to be and you're going to like it. We have to have input. We have to have the committees have to deliberate about this to determine if this is something they want to recommend. And I knew going in that a general bylaw would probably not get a recommendation from the planning board because they did need something more specific. However, you don't need the planning board's official recommendation to still move forward. They just have to have a hearing on it. And
Mm.
that's what the meeting he was describing was the hearing that is required. One of the things that Jesse's process has made clear to me is that a smoother, I mean, he's paving this road right now.
Mhm.
A smoother handoff between citizens and boards needs to happen. And I've already begun working with other colleagues about trying to make sure that this citizen process is smoother and Jesse's lesson can be shared with others.
Yep. I appreciate that. And seeing it. It's funny. I think there's times we don't pause to think about this, but in, in the corporate world, you have the driver of profit. You're trying to make money, and that's just not the same in government. So that listening, that process, and I can really feel as you're describing it, that the contrast and the tension and, oh my gosh, the frustration, if you're used to being in this world where it's like profit. And Jesse, I think particularly, I mean, if our Wi-Fi hiccups for a minute, people are freaking out, so much less,
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
the speed of light.
Yeah, I mean, like the connectivity of like people's world. I mean, everything revolves around connectivity. So, like the wire, like anybody who has made a career or been in a career of retail in general, whether it's, sporting goods or apparel or wireless. I mean, those types of people are so well equipped to handle things in life because of what that industry is like. Because it's not only the demand of customers, right, of what keeps them going, it's also the demand of upselling those customers and finding solutions to them when you really just want to just solve the problem and go on to the next one.
Yeah.
So that is such a difficult industry to be successful in. And, I'd recommend anybody at some point in time to try that avenue first, because you learn so much people skills and so how to handle difficult
Yeah.
situations.
It's interesting though. My mind is going, there's a really smart thinker, Harry Boyte, who talks about how as people nowadays, we are learning how to be consumers. And as we're, things that can, be delivered to our house, we've got the ease of just, buying things. And I'm not doing his theory right now at any justice, but that our identity is in how much stuff we have and how we own and how we buy. And that's just so much that we're surrounded by. As I say that, as you go around the rest of your day, like notice how many advertisements are coming through, like podcasts or Amazon, all that, like we're buying things. We're not seeing ourselves as citizens, we're consumers. We're not acting as citizens. And so it makes me smile to think of this notion, like, how do we upsell citizenship, rather than just voting every 4 years? How do you get even more involved? And I'm hopeful that your story will encourage people to do that. And I feel like we've left people at this really critical point. So you are going now into this town meeting. I would love to hear, how are you feeling at that point? What are you thinking? And like, tell us how it went.
Oh, I was freaking out. Um, I was freaking out. Yeah. I mean, I remember like maybe 2 days prior to it, I'm like, okay, it's coming. Like, it is what it is. And throughout this whole time, I'm talking to my business partner, like while we're working, I'm talking to the installers. I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, cause the day of it, we did an install. I was on an install out in Agawam, and I get on site, and my buddy's like, my business partner is also my best friend in like life. So, he's like, how you feeling? I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, this is going to be 50-50. I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, I've talked to a bunch of people. I have gotten a bunch of people going forward and going to the meeting for me and talking to the meeting. I'm like, but I don't know. I don't know if it's gonna be enough people. I mean, because I was always worried about that, like that silent majority, because like maybe a couple weeks before, I'd made a post in the community forum and it got tremendously positive feedback. Like, I mean, I think it got like 90 likes or something, because how those forums work is, you post something, nice in there, right? Where it's like, oh, like I was driving around and I saw a really nice tree. Nobody says anything. Nobody says one like and like zero comments, right? But then you get somebody in there that posts like, just something like ridiculous, right? Where it's like, oh my God, like why are our trash barrels so small? 5,000 likes and 800 comments. Like, it's crazy. So when it had gotten the feedback in there, I was like, okay, that's a good sign. Like, I didn't get much pushback. There were some negatives, but nothing really bad. But anybody that was negative, there was people that I didn't even know just attacking them with positivity, like attacking them. And I was like, man, okay, great. But that day, you know, I'm going through the day, and it's just, the day is just going so slow. I'm trying to be preoccupied because I know that this thing is coming up. I'm texting my wife throughout the day. I'm freaking out, like, because I got to do like this presentation with it, you know, because again, throughout the process, you know, I had found out, you know, through Rebecca and Vineeth, and, you know, they were like, hey, you know, you can submit to have like 5 minutes and have a presentation and go over that. So I spent some time creating that, getting that in on time. So not only was I just nervous about the vote, I was nervous about just presenting, right? I have a lot of experience with that, but I hadn't done that in so long, you know, and I'm presenting about not business. Like I'm pretty good at talking. I have decent business acumen, so I can speak to that. But this was different. You know, this was just different. I'm trying to educate, you know, clarify and educate. It's just different. So, you know, we kind of get through the whole day, and you know, I tell my wife, I'm like, listen, like, you know, I got to get there early. I talked to Rebecca that day, and I was like, what time should I get there? And she's like, you know, it's pretty a social event. Like, you can kind of get there a little earlier and maybe some chat with some people and go from there. And I was like, okay, you know, so I get there around like six, I don't know, maybe like 6:15 or something. And you know, I'm kind of like I'm parking, and you know, I'm seeing a lot of people. There's a lot of people outside the school where the meeting was, and you know, picketing for different things and select board members and stuff. And I'm like, okay, like, this isn't that bad. And you know, I start seeing a couple of the planning board members. I really forgot his name, but his son lives across the street from me, and he was also great, super helpful. I just forgot his name, but you know, I see him going up there, and he's like, oh, how you doing? He's a very like chill guy, like, you know, I really forgot his name. He's got like a long white hair and like a ponytail. I forgot his name. Really cool guy. He's like, how's it going? I'm like, I'm freaking out, man. Like, I don't know. And he goes, it's gonna be 50-50. And I was like, I know, man. Like, that's what's freaking me out. And the 50-50 thing is funny because I'll fill it in a sec. But, you know, I start seeing people like filtering in, and because the whole time I'm like, I don't know how many people are going to be here. I talked to Rebecca. I'm like, is it going to be 500? Is it going to be 200? Is it going to be 1,000? Like, I have no idea. And she's like, well, you know, I don't really know. I mean, sometimes there's a lot, depends on the agenda. You know, there's not a lot on this particular agenda. There was like a vote for like the pool that might attract some people. But then, you know, I'm thinking like, okay, 300, 250, maybe. And I'm in the school, and people are just pouring in, like, they're just coming. Door keeps opening, and I'm like, oh man. I'm like looking around, like, there's got to be like 400 people here, 350 people. I'm like, there's no way I have enough people that came for me. And I walk into the gymnasium, and I start seeing a lot of like my customers. I'm like, oh, okay, nice, cool. And you know, they're like, hey, I'm here to support you. And I was like, man, great, like, awesome. Like, everybody says they're going to do something, but you know, you don't get a lot of, you know, people that will stop what they're doing to show up on a Tuesday night at 7, you know? So that kind of happens, and I'm like, okay, great. But again, I'm still searching around the room, and I brought my son because, you know, we don't have a babysitter. So, you know, I see Rebecca. I literally, as soon as I heard her talking, I was like, because I never met her in person, like, everything was on the phone. So I see her walking around, and you know, and I kind of like looking at her, I'm like, okay. And then I hear her talk, and I'm like, that's who she is. So immediately, like, you know, I think she was talking to my wife, unknowingly talking to my wife and my son. He was just walking around, just hanging out. And I just kind of go up to her, and we kind of like finally meet. And I was like this warm feeling kind of came over me. And I was like, I got like calm, right? I was very anxious, and I got like calm. And then she's like, oh yeah, I was talking to your wife. I didn't even know. And I'm like, this is just like, these meant to be things are like happening. It's like weird. And because I believe in that type of fate stuff, right? So, you know, I'm like, okay, so, but again, I keep seeing all these people. So that was kind of leading up to it. And then, you know, I think my article was like 12, so it might be like 45 minutes or so. And then, you know, I don't know how much further you want me to go, you know, but then it was kind of like my turn. So I'm not sure if you want me to keep going, or if you have another.
So the hour is flying by. So I want to highlight a couple things. First, if folks have questions, please put those in the Q&A. And if we don't reach those, we will get back to you in some form or fashion. And Jesse, again, I feel like we keep leaving folks and Rebecca on this cliffhanger, but I want to highlight a few things. One that's just so important on social media, and how negativity gets so much more response often than positivity. I love your example, like, oh, there's a beautiful tree, crickets, and then something's off and everybody's just piling on. So that negativity we can feel online that may not reflect and often does not reflect reality. And then the other thing is just how different advocacy can be. I mean, you can be used to presenting in so many different places. You can, great conversations with your friend, but coming in front of a huge group, or even if it's not a small group, but or not a huge group, if it's a small group of policymakers and lawmakers to come in and be speaking in this way, advocacy can feel very different. And so I just want to acknowledge like that experience. You are describing an experience that so many people have. And so we're now you're up, let's say you've given your presentation. Tell us then in about 30 seconds, if you can, what happens next?
Yeah, so give the presentation, and then Rebecca, there's a lot of people that are either at the green microphone or whatever, kind of advocating for it. And I see so many people at the green microphone. I kind of look over at Josh and Beneath, and I look at them like, it's my work. Like, there's a lot of people that are in favor of us, and not a lot of people that aren't. So then Rebecca's like, this thing that she's like, are we ready to vote? She's like, I think so. And my heart just like sinks. And I'm like, all right, all this work has led up to these next 15 seconds. And she's like, the vote requires a 2/3 vote. And I was like, what? I was the whole time I'm thinking, I'm like, man, do I have 200 people here? And then I'm like, oh my God, I need like 300 people. Like, I'm like 67%. I'm like, oh my God, there's no way I have enough people. And then she's like, ready to vote. And then the room just goes silent. You can hear like a literal pin drop. And it just felt like an hour. It just kept going and going and going. And then, she's like, okay. And the vote is now closed. And there's a bunch of like screens throughout the thing where people electronically vote. And then it just pops up. And it was like 308 like yeses to like 76 no's. And I'm like, oh my God, like, oh my God. And then I just hear people start to like cheer, and they're like cheering. And I'm like, wait, is that even 67%? I have no idea. Is that enough? And then like Rebecca has like this kind of joy in her voice. And she's like, and the vote passes. And I'm like, oh my God, like this just worked. I look over at Beneath, and he like has this face of like, holy, like, oh my God, this just worked. And then like people are like cheering, and I'm like, okay, like, I'm like, oh my God. And I think I just like gave him like a thumbs up on my way out or something. And I was like, thank you. And then you just kind of hear some like laughs here and there. And then one of the negative voices kind of got me from the side at the end. But yeah, and it worked. And I was like, it was crazy. I mean, it was wild, and it was by a landslide. I mean, it wasn't even close,
I love it. I love it. I have one more question to you both. I first though want to acknowledge, I guess, that the question I'll ask is, if there's one thing you want people to remember from all of this, what would that thing be? But before we get to that, I just want to share, in a lot of spaces, we talk about using our civic muscle and exercising and building that civic muscle. Again, making that switch from being, consumers, or thinking it's enough to just, maybe show up and vote every 4 years. It's actually, being a citizen every single day. So to take that metaphor, Jesse, I'm curious when we're talking about muscle and asking people sometimes, like, it may be kind of getting up off the couch for the first time, so to speak, as a citizen. How would you liken this? Was this like a marathon? Was this a really tough, like, weightlifting class? What when it comes to civic muscle, what did this feel like to you?
This was basically this was kind of like, if I could equate to something that like I went through, was kind of like being around like when my kid was born. Like, and what I mean by that is, we had like this like set plan of meeting with this. We were meeting with the doctor for 9 months, and my wife ends up like going into labor. The doctor's on vacation, so new doctor. So there's a twist. And then we get through the process, and then a bunch of things happen, and we have to do a non-traditional delivery. So then there's a shift, and then you're going through this, and meanwhile, like, everything's happening around you so fast, and you're just like, okay. And people are helping and all over the place. And then you finally get to the end, and it's like, great, it worked out. Here he is. Like, here we go. And I think that that's like the best way, at least for something personal, but it definitely was it was a marathon. Like, this is not, anybody, I guess, who is thinking about doing something like this. It takes time. Like, you cannot do it it's not a fire drill. It's impossible to be effective on a fire drill. And if you think If you think you're the person that will pull it off, I can promise you, I'm a person that I think could pull it off, and I couldn't pull it off, right? That you need time.
Mhm.
And when you're kind of saying, what would I get, the advice, I guess I would say, or to kind of sum it up in a word, would really be like inclusivity. Because if there was no other people involved in this, would never work. It would never work, because I wouldn't have come up with half of the words that came. I wouldn't have had the verbiage. I wouldn't have had the legal structure. I wouldn't have had the idea of a general bylaw, right, versus the specific one. So if you're going to do something like this, you have to get feedback from other people and be inclusive in this process. And that's just not inclusive of people that agree with you. It's inclusive of literally everyone, whether they're directly involved, not directly involved, things like that.
Love it. Love it. All right. And I'm seeing a question we will put into the follow-up. What law would you like to modify or change next? We will include that in our follow-up. Rebecca, one thing that you want everybody to remember from this webinar?
That they have more power than they think. Jesse wasn't sure that this would work. With some encouragement, he was able to birth this civic baby, if I could use your metaphor. It's not always easy to do necessarily, but it can be done. And they can find hope in Jesse's story, that where there's some injustice that they see, they can work to change it.
I love that. What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you both, Rebecca and Jesse, for joining today and sharing, not just to share the story, but for all the work that went into making the story possible, to actually making a difference in your town. We will put a bunch of links in the chat right now. This is a monthly series, and so I would love for you to join us next month for a really exciting discussion about the impact of storytelling in entertainment and how that can have an impact in our lives beyond just being entertaining. There will be other things that are popping up. We will include all of these resources in the follow-up email, including how to stay in touch with Dr. Townsend and with Jesse and find his business online. As you log off, there will be a 15-second poll that pops up. Please be a helper, give us some feedback. We really value that, and that'll inform future webinars. So again, thank you both so much. Be well, do good, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.